Okay, so in today's review, I'm going to do Rich again, who is here, whose channel is Entrepreneur in Cars. And today he talks about, just trying to get the camera right, oh, this way. Today he talks about a study that shows only 2% live in bliss after 8 years of, I'm assuming, marriage. It's an interesting study. Now, remember, his point is very factual and about human behavior and how men and women react to each other. Mine is going to be more from like a energy perspective of like, I guess I hate the word, I don't like the word spiritual, but it is going to be more like a spiritual perspective of male and female, yin and yang. All right, let's get started. Wait. Where'd I go?
For kids and long-term love and all that sort of thing, and it's the most noble and best thing a man
This
can
is
do.
so annoying.
I've got a chapter in my book that talks about the truth about marriage, of course. I may release that to you guys on the list, so if you've got the 19 red flags, I'll probably send that off to you at some point later on because I think it's relevant. But the key result was 42 of the 312 participants, which is 13%, gave top mark. In this study, it was all sixes. Basically gave top
For
mark
God's sake.
in every romantic love item or category. Their mean relationship length, so their average length, was 8.39 years. So let me distill that for you in simpler terms. Let me warm this up because I got to get a move on. So in simpler terms, only 42, or basically 13% of all the participants, indicated that they still felt romantic love for their partners after 8.39 years. For obsession, which to me would indicate, items towards bliss. A lot of guys will sell you on the notion of bliss, like romantic bliss. It's the most blissful thing. So in the category of obsession, which is slightly higher, only 2%, so only 6 individuals out of 312 indicated obsession for one another. Say that again. 13% of the 312 participants indicated romantic love for one another after 8.39 years, and only 6, or 2%, indicated bliss. Let's get rid of these, throw in some shades, hit the road, and let's talk about that a little bit more, because I think these results are interesting as F. So we already know that about half, I think in North America, the stat last time I saw it was 50.
Okay, so before he goes into the stats of divorce rates, I want to just talk about bliss. So, bliss, I know like in this human world, we see bliss as it's kind of the state that you want to be in. But from an energy perspective, bliss is not a state that you want to be in all the time. It just doesn't work. Like bliss is the ego. So when you look at this from an egotistical energy perspective, bliss is really high. So in human relationships, we want to experience balance, right? And if you go too far over to the bliss side, that is also ego. It's superficial and it's not like true love. It's not balance. Balance is here. Love is in the state of non, because we always want to react, right? We want to be either in this like super blissful state, or we want to be in this like angry, reactive, yang male energy state. So both are actually not good. Where you want to be is kind of in a state of neutrality in a relationship, in a state of understanding. Love is very soft. You have to remember that. Like people think like infatuation is where you want to be. That's a state of bliss, right? It's actually not. Infatuation is the ego. Whenever you have quick action in things, that is the ego. So for me, like 2% still being in bliss is a little worrisome, I would say. But
We're just here to look at these numbers on long-term happiness in a relationship. Car always does that, going down a hill with these front sensors. I'm not sure if you guys noticed that on newer cars, but it's so bizarre. Anyway, so the long and short of it is, long-term relationships are incredibly difficult to manage. The result of most long-term relationships is not bliss or happiness or romantic love. It's, for the most part, divorce. I mean, 53% of marriages end in divorce. And there's a good chunk of those people that stay married that are remaining unhappily married. For those that are remaining unhappily married, we don't have a lot of data on that. But what we do know from this study is the average couple, average, 8.39 years, whatever the hell that means. But the average LTR with a couple, only 13% are in true romantic love for one another, and only 2% are living in a state of obsession. So what hopes do you have? I mean, and I'm not trying to be disparaging here, and I'm not trying to, set aside the values or the merits of family and long-term relationships or any of those things. I mean, you can choose to do whatever you want to do. I know a lot of guys that are very happily unmarried in long-term relationships, or very happily unmarried in an open relationship. I also know a handful of people, very small handful, I can probably count them on two fingers, two relationships, in fact, that I'm aware of, where they've been married for more than 20 years and still obsessed with one another, and they've still had a gluttony of problems, and both of them, in fact, did at one point contemplate marriage quite seriously. So, again, the study is not to encourage or discourage you, but it's just for me to hold up a mirror and shine on some cold hard truth bombs that a lot of people.
See, in this video, he seems to portray divorce as like a really bad thing. And yeah, it is a bad thing, but we have to stop looking at it in such such a negative veil. We have on one end of the spectrum, we've got marriage, and then on the other end of the spectrum, we have divorce. And then there are I feel like in the middle, those couples that do experience love and then just find themselves have grown apart. I think it's just too bad that there's more women and men in between here that hate each other, that just can't work shit out. And they begin to you love this person at one point in your life, and then they begin to hate on them and slam and just do things that are mean to each other. So this is where we have to change the energy of growing apart. And yeah, we call it divorce right now. It's an ending, but we can also just kind of look back. And if it is 8.5 years that a relationship lasts, that just means that one person has outgrown the other, or both have outgrown each other. And we need to just move on. I just feel like divorce has such an awful connotation, because it does. I understand that it does, but we really need to change the energy of that and just come into this realization that we are all going to grow. Is marriage needed? I mean, I want to be married one day, but I've been on my own for 12 years, and I'm finally ready to have that lifelong partner. I think it's just ingrained in us right now. I mean, I don't know. Let's see what he's got to say.
Choose to ignore because of cultural or societal conditioning that's encouraged them to do the right thing, wife up that girl, single mom, whatever the narrative, whatever the story is behind, the idea that getting into a cohabitating LTR, or living in a way the state sees as a cohabitating LTR/marriage, is a good idea. Vast majority of people are not happy about it. Now, of course, this is only taken into account studies of people that are in an LTR. It's not discounting the roughly half of marriages that end. It just can't factor that in, because it's only talking to people that are in long-term relationships. So, I mean, the chances of it working out favorably in a romantic or even a slightly blissful way, if you will, because that was the other component of that study, it's relatively small. I mean, the chances of being successful are quite low. But the other component of that, which is not talking about, is essentially the risk factor, because when you factor in, here comes the popo. Wasn't me. Because when you factor in, the truth of divorce and how it treats men going through the divorce machine, especially if you're a father, divorce is or family law is exceptionally hostile towards men.
See, okay, so the other thing, I think these studies are just set up wrong. And I think these studies are set up in a way to show divide and to show chaos within relationships, which is kind of I think right now on an energetic level, like on a dimensional level, we are leaving the state of negativity. And I do understand that, yeah, I mean, this study was set out to prove that, okay, so a long term relationship, LTR, is about 8.5 years, let's say. That's how long it lasts. That's the span that people have each other and then they want something else or something new. I mean, I think there's some real cool like awesomeness and some togetherness can be found when you work things out with a partner if the other partner is willing to. I'm a strong believer, like, go to counseling, get the help that you need, join the gym together, do things outside of your habits that you've done for 8 years, and find yourselves together. That's so fun to do. Oh my God, when I'm in a relationship, I actually haven't been in like a really long-term relationship in a long time, but I know when I was married, before my husband passed away, he was my high school sweetheart. And we grew up together. Like, we learned together. We went through our good and bad together. But it was kind of cool because everything was together. And I'm not saying, who knows, maybe we wouldn't have if he didn't pass away 12 years ago at the very young age of 30 years old. I mean, I'm 42 now. Maybe we wouldn't have lasted. I don't know the answers to those. So, yeah, I think that the studies, instead of talking about like, oh, after bliss, it's only 2% that live in bliss, and that's after 8 years. I think studies need to change their tone and maybe talk about how couples make it work, not just give you this is like define bliss. What the fuck does bliss mean exactly? What does it mean? There's no definition. Also, love. Like, love is going to have ups and downs. It's all about nurture, learning, understanding, and understanding isn't fun. You're mirroring the other person. So, anyways, let's see what else he has to talk about.
When it comes to how they're treated and their rights and their access to their kids and how money flows and stuff like that. Um, when you factor in the male experience in the family law or the family legal system, the divorce machine, whatever it is that you want to call it, it's not particularly good. There's a number of other factors that come into play in marriage and long-term relationships or living in a way that's deemed as a marriage. In fact, I think I'm going to give away this chapter too. I'm probably going to give away a good chunk of what's going to be in this book. So get on the list, pinned below, at some point in the next month or so.
So I'm going to end it here. If you want to watch the rest of the video, you can. But I do agree with him. I think whenever the legal system gets involved, you're giving up your own power. And this is where I was talking about, like, why do we have to hate each other? Why can't we as parents make it work and be agreeable without absolute hate for the other person? And I do understand this is easier said than done, but this is where yin energy comes into play. This is why it is so important as females, even men, hold your feminine energy. We all have feminine energy. We need to be more kind and compassionate to each other. And this isn't, I know people can look at this and think it's funny and it's a laughing matter. It's not a laughing matter. This is reality. We do need to be more compassionate so the law isn't fucking men over for their children. I mean, I think that's wrong. And I have heard of it happen again and again. It is getting better, but why can't we just be nice to each other?